probably open it up to more about gambling policy in general. We're joined today by two very august guests, starting with Carolyn Harris, MP for Swansea East. Probably won't really need much introduction. I've written here, multi-award winning, Youth Statesman, Spectator campaign, all sorts of things, and really very impressive, and has undoubtedly been leading the charge on so much on gambling reform over the last few years. Parliamentary chair of the Labour campaign for gambling reform, chair of the gambling related APPG, we also led the Fair Funerals campaign, led the Fair Tea campaign back in the day, and currently chair of the all-party group around the menopause campaign. So much there, and we're very pleased to have you here today. But we'll rush through because you do have to go at 6. And next to me here, Will Prohaska, Strategy Director of Gambling with Lives, been there for the last 3 years. And Gambling Lives, a charity set up by family and friends bereaved by gambling-related suicide, was set up by Charles and Liz Ritchie, who sadly lost their son to gambling-related suicide. We'll talk about the charity in a minute. But I think we'll start off with Carolyn. I guess Carolyn, those of us, and I'm sure most of you here, have sort of worked in or understood or been following the gambling thing. I guess the big bit has been that since the government launched a white paper in 2020, what was it, sort of 9-month consultation?
It was 2020.
Yeah, I know there was, and we've been waiting ever since, and it's driving everyone crazy, I think, waiting, from all sides of the arguments. So I guess, Carolyn, for you, the question, I guess, to kick off with for you is the obvious thing of what would you like to see in the white paper, but perhaps also you can touch on the politics of it. Why has it been 3 years, do you think?
It feels as if it's been a lifetime. That 3 years literally feels like a lifetime. But if you roll this back to 2015, when I first became a politician, there wasn't any talk of reform whatsoever. Before we set up the APPG on what was then the fixed odds betting terminals, nobody was looking at this industry at all. And since 2005, they pretty much had a free rein because the legislation is analogue and the industry and modern day is technical. And there's nothing in the original legislation which covers what is my real concern, and that's online gambling. And it wasn't until we started looking at fixed odds betting terminals and I was getting some really painful testimony from people like Tony. Tony was one of the first people I met when I first started doing work on gambling, and you can't but help to hear Tony's story and to feel that gambling destroyed his life. Luckily, Tony's with us today and he can tell a different story, but it was a long struggle. But when I was listening to the testimony on fixed odds betting terminals, more and more often that was getting mixed with real concerns around online gambling. Now, the industry would demonise me as someone who is a prohibitionist, anti-gambling, and God forbid, a Methodist. That was the one that cracked me up most. Nothing could be true further from the truth, because I'm certainly not anti-gambling. I come from a whole family of Welshmen who spend Saturday afternoon. Cheltenham Gold Cup is sacrosanct in our house, and they watched it religiously on telly, and they had their bet, and they were more than happy with that. And Sunday I was dropping my husband off at the bookie so he can go and put his bet on the Cheltenham Gold Cup. I would go and play bingo. I would go to a casino. I don't understand the game, so I don't actually do it. I don't understand horse racing. I do like the colours that the jockeys wear. What I'm saying is, if you can participate in gambling and it doesn't destroy your self-respect, it doesn't destroy your economic situation, it doesn't destroy your family, and probably more pertinent, it doesn't take your life, and you are in total control, then that's fine. But what we know is that the industry's online presence, that less than 10% of the punters provide more than 60% of the profits. There is something drastically wrong there. And when you look into it and you look into the kinds of things that happen with online gambling, the kinds of narrative, and I don't know if anybody heard the Radio 4 documentary at the weekend, which actually transpired to be somebody from Swansea who had literally been on my doorstep for a long time and I never realised it, and how much his life had been dramatically changed because of his ability to gamble online. Then you can only be feeling that the 3 years is a long time, but in comparison to where we were, the 3 years is not. I think we've done pretty good to get from having absolutely no conversation at all to being on the precipice of getting a piece of paper which will legislate, hopefully, in most of the areas that we need to be looking at. And for me, the ultimate has got to be a statutory levy. Because without a statutory levy, we will not have the money to do the research, to be able to inform the education, to be able to inform the recovery, to be able to inform the treatment. So without that statutory levy, everything else is just a waste of time for me. If we don't get that, then I'll feel that we've wasted the last 5-6 years of my life trying to get us where we are now. There are huge concerns around advertising. There are huge concerns around VIP systems. There are huge concerns around the fact that you can gamble what you like online, but you can't on land. There's no parity. That needs to be rectified. And I think for the individual punter, there needs to be an ombudsman. Because as it stands at the moment, and this is something which I get inundated with in my inbox, is that people who feel that they've been treated unfairly by the industry on a personal level are not able to get any compensation or recompense or any refunds on the money that they've gambled, which they feel is unjust. Now, they can go to the Gambling Commission, and provided the Gambling Commission have got enough complaints about that particular company, they will investigate, and then there will be a fine, and that money will go to Gamble Aware, who will then channel that money into projects. And my thing with Gamble Aware, which Charlie knows, has always been that I've always had a grave concern that the industry has had too much influence over Gamble Aware, and therefore, without a statutory levy and held by an independent body, that will continue to be the case. Now, I may be wrong, but if I am wrong, then a lot of people think the same as me, so we're all wrong. Something must have happened along the lines to allow us to think that, or we wouldn't be thinking what we're thinking. So, and that's never been disproved to me, that the industry does not have a say in how that money is spent. When you speak to people like NHS England who say they cannot work with Gamble Aware's money because the restrictions that are put on them on what they can and can't do make it impossible for them to do their job. So I've got to say, well, there's a problem here. So we need Gamble Aware, well, we need a body to be independent, but with an ombudsman, we need those individuals who currently may or not, and I'm not saying that all the cases that come to me should have their money back. I'm not saying all of them are exploited. I'm not saying all of them should, because I have one lady who emails me weekly because she'll gamble and then she'll want a refund the next day. That's not right. So I don't defend her. In fact, I ignore her now, if I'm perfectly honest. But then I have other people come to me with a much, much bigger story with obvious grooming, exploitation, call it what you like. And those are the people who should have an opportunity to have that conversation with somebody and that organisation to be able to say, yes, you should get compensation for the way you've been treated. So, if you were to say to me, what would I like to see? I would like to see all those things remedied in the white paper. If you say to me, what do I think will be in there? I think there will be little bits of most of them. I don't think you will see a complete ban on advertising. I really don't think. I think you may see a voluntary ban with the Premier League clubs, but I do not honestly think at this stage that we're going to have a ban on advertising with the shirts, etc. Do I think there'll be an ombudsman? Yes, I do. Do I think there will be stakes on land and online? jury's out on that one. I really don't know. Do I think there'll be a statutory levy? I'm getting the mood music that says yes. And if we do get that, then that for me is a massive result. And I would be celebrating the fact that we've done something that nobody ever thought we would do. They never thought we would do it on fixed odds betting terminals, and we did. So we have got a track record on backing trends here. But I think that will be the biggest outcome, is there will be a statutory levy. It will be polluter pays, which is quite right. But that's what I think would be the big thing that will come out of this white paper. And if I get that, then I will feel that my work is done. I probably will not. I may be retiring from gambling. Tell everyone. I may be retiring from gambling if I get that. Because, I think maybe it needs fresh legs now. It needs fresh eyes, fresh legs. And if I get the statutory levy, I can't see there'd be any reason for me to continue. I would have got what I asked for.
Thank you, Karen. And how about the politics of why it's 3 years?
Oh, well, we know why, because we play musical chairs. We play musical, and I think we were at a point with Chrisfell where we probably had exactly what I wanted. And I don't know if anybody saw Chrisfell give evidence in a recent Home Affairs Select Committee when I was questioning about drugs, and he actually likened the problem with drugs to gambling, something I've done many times previously and been slated for, but he likened it as well, and his words were that it was the industry that were trying to stop regulation. So no surprises there. Not all the industry, just part of the industry that wants to protect that little nest egg they've got. And in all fairness, if I was a new minister coming in, I would probably want to have a look at something that was bearing my name. So but I do think that we should be at a point now where they should accept the fact that we've had enough ministers back and forward. They're gonna have to put pen to paper. And I have been asked to a meeting with the current gambling minister, who I did see in the vote lobby today, who said, "I'm meeting you soon and I'm terrified." So I don't know what it is he's worried about, but he's anxious. But that's the politics of it.
Thank you very much for that. Will, it sounds like you and Karen are on the same page on another basis, having looked at the Gambling Guides website, and I'm sure there's much more you'd like to see. But so, tell us about the Gambling Guides and what you'd like to see out of the white paper.
Thank you, and I'm very much on the same page as Karen, and sort of riding in her wake. We've been so impressed with the work that she's done over the years, so we're very lucky. I think the Labour Party are very lucky to have Karen Harris leading the charge on this and other topics. I joined Gambling Lives about 3 years ago, and I was relatively naive about gambling at that point. I had a healthy suspicion of some of the industry's products and practices, as most people in the country too do. If you look at poll after poll, you'll see that the gambling industry is one of the least trusted industries, least liked industries by the public at large in the UK. I think that's important for the politics, and we'll come back to that later perhaps, about the opportunities for Labour in response to the white paper. And I shared that position, but I didn't know the ins and outs, and what I've learned in the 3 years that I've been with the organisation has shocked me deeply and continues to shock me on a daily basis, sadly. I'll just touch on some of the points that Carolyn's mentioned. I agree with her entirely. We get called prohibitionists, anti-gambling prohibitionists, daily, weekly, whatever. It's like all drop a duck's back these days. I actually think that the people I work with and people like Carolyn, more so people who have been directly harmed, are some of the most mature commentators on this space, because what you would expect to see from families who've lost people to suicide, where you can literally track the VIP scheme that has pushed somebody person to person towards their death, and then continue to offer them free bets after they are dead. You can literally, to expect those people to be mature in a debate is asking a lot, but that's what they are. It's absolutely astonishing, and they are not asking to ban gambling. You'd expect them to ask people to just ban gambling. They're not. They are looking at product differentiation. They're looking at intelligent regulation, where you target the regulation at the worst products and the worst practices of the industry, and you leave the traditional forms of gambling to one side. Nobody in my organisation has ever asked for a policy that would really negatively impact racecourses or racing. We, like Carolyn, are looking online. Online is where the most addictive products and practices of the industry are found. That's where the real danger is. And that's what the people who I represent are asking for. And I have to say, for them to be written off as prohibitionists in some lazy sort of slang battle is distasteful, but that's the space that we're in. It's worth mentioning, Karen said 60% of profits. Actually, the Gambling Commission CEO recently said 90% of profits take out the National Lottery come from 5% of customers. That's from the Gambling Commission CEO. And the House of Lords report found that those 5% of customers are either addicted or at very high risk of addiction. So you've got an online business model which is 90% based on a mental health harm. Give me any other industry in Britain, online industry in Britain, where that is the case. It's a frightening statistic. This is not a normal industry, the online industry. These are not normal products. These products are really dangerous. And making the parallel as Carolyn did to drugs, addiction rates for heroin, right? Of all the people that take heroin, only about a third of them are actually addicted to it. That surprises lots of people. Of all the people that play online slots, just under 50% are addicted or at high risk of addiction to them. So these products, it's quite hard for people to understand because you're not putting something into your body, but actually the chemicals, the dopamine in the brain, have really similar impacts on the brain to drugs that you actually insert into your body. And when you understand that, you understand that the products have been designed to make those pathways addictive, this is where the harm's coming from. So that's why we're targeting products and we're not prohibitionists. I think it's worth just mentioning a little bit about the gambling. We talk about prohibition, we talk about statute, we talk about gambling. The industry's response to our calls for reform are worthy of a little bit of exploration. The defence of the industry, and this is where there's a challenge for me between the traditional parts of the industry and the online parts, because the lobbyist, Michael Duggar, leading the Betting Gaming Council, uses traditional gambling to hide behind. He hides, he tucks in online, which is getting 90% of his profits from 5% of his customers. He tucks it in behind racecourses. He says, how dare you guys be asking for reform? You're asking for affordability checks. You're saying people are going to have to go to the racecourse and show their wage slip before they can place a bet. Oh, I didn't say that. I didn't say, where did that come from, right? He's using people's memory of fun, a racecourse, tradition, what their parents might have done when online didn't exist. He's using that, tapping into that to hide this astonishingly abnormal industry that's making supernormal profits from a really addictive set of online products. And that's a real pity, and I suppose my only frustration with the land-based traditional forms of gambling is that somehow they've let that happen. I don't know why racing hasn't said, hold on, I don't want anything to do with Bet365's online slot offer with 50 free spins. That's not us. We've got an amazing supply chain over here, people going to the races, Cheltenham, social activity, wonderful contribution to the economy. Why are you sticking me in with this lot who are leading people to their death? I don't understand. Maybe someone in the room will tell me later. But what the industry's done is use what the tobacco industry's done for decades, right? It's the individual's fault. So they will give you the prevalence statistics from the Gambling Commission, which are deeply flawed because they ring people up. They ring up 500 people every 6 months and say, are you a gambling addict? And what do you know? Almost everyone says no, right? And the fact that is how they do their prevalence statistics. And what do you know? It comes out at the moment, it's like 0.2% of the country suffer a gambling disorder. YouGov did it online. They found it was 1.4 million people. It's massive disparity. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how many people are suffering. Anecdotally, we think it's a lot. There's a lot of people coming to gambling lives, and we've seen an uptick in terms of families referring to us. In the week, we were here a few weeks ago having a parliamentary event, and on the day that we held our event, we found out 2 people died. Right, in our network. We've never heard of deaths that soon after people have died before, never. And on the day of our event, we found out 2 people died. In that week, we had 3 families referred to us. And it wasn't a blip. This is, we've got a real problem as a charity. How do we support all these people, right? Now that could be a function of all sorts of things. It could be a function of our profile has increased. It could be a function of, the work that Carolyn and others have done has started to decrease the stigma, so people are more willing to reach out for help. It could be a function of there being more deaths. I personally think it's a function of all 3. And I think things are going to get worse before they get better, because whatever comes out of the white paper is going to take a long time. It's going to be a load of consultations. It's going to be the industry, the online industry at least, is going to try and resist and push back and stop all the things that Cameron have won, slow down all the tactics that the tobacco industry used. But their biggest tactic is to blame the individual. Biggest tactic is to tell you there's just a small number of people who are vulnerable to gambling addiction, right? And those people, we need to help those people, those poor, irresponsible gamblers, yeah, but don't impact the fun of the rest of us who all love a flutter every day night. It's not true. Okay, the biggest study of this kind on Lloyd's banking data, right, 5 million customer bank accounts were analysed by a team at Oxford University, and they found that they could prove hard stats that 1 in 4 of everyone who gambles is significantly harmed. And they were measuring that by things like having to take out payday loans. Now, speaking to the researchers on the side, they say actually they would back it as like 1 in 3. Okay, so the bell curve of harm, what we see, I suppose, if we're successful at gambling lives, we see in the press a lot of stories about death. Absolutely horrific. These are the most harmed people. They're at this end of the graph, right? Tiny proportion, up to 500 people a year dying because of this. In England, though, it will tell you. But again, no one really knows because the data's not great, right? Because the research hasn't been funded by the industry. We'll come back to that. But actually, on the bell curve of harm, there will be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people in the middle of that bell curve who are significantly harmed by the online practices of the industry. And that's what the industry don't want you to know. They want you to think it's just a tiny proportion, and the people we should talk about are those who are addicted. But they deny that they die because they're addicted. But, that's another challenge. And they're pushing of that individual responsibility narrative. Why I always go on about it is because the people that do die are pushed towards their death by that narrative. The stigma that comes with being told it's all your fault and you're the odd one out. Everyone else gambles responsibly. Why can't you do it, you idiot? Come on. It's so awful, and it shows up in the suicide notes. Right? It's horrific, and it stops people from reaching out for help. And when we talk about gambling, the industry played a blinder, right? Because not only do they push that message themselves, they've gone and got a load of charities to push it for them. What a win! Happy days. Everyone trusts a charity number, don't they? No idea why, because anyone can get charity registration in this country. So it's a separate issue. Maybe that could be the next one. Clean up the charity act, yeah. But you go and get a charity, and I don't know how much influence they have over them. They don't get the board anymore. It did come from an industry place. But the point is, they choose who delivers. This is like tobacco saying, we're going to choose who delivers smoking cessation campaigns. You wouldn't, what? That would just be bonkers, right? That's the situation we've got. The gambling industry, the Betting and Gaming Council, choose who delivers education about gambling risk in our classrooms. And when academics at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and Cambridge University analysed all of those education resources, the biggest education resources going out across the UK, delivered by GambleAware, GamCare and YGAM, the industry's 3 favourite organisations, they found that the education resources problematised children, shifted blame onto the people who are suffering, and obscured the role of the industry in creating harm. Ooh, what a surprise. So whether or not they influence them, they know that if they don't play by the individual responsibility playbook, the funding will be removed. Right? So that's the corruption. So
can I pause you there? Because we've got 5 more minutes of Karen.
Yeah, let's get back to Karen now.
Karen, sorry, I want to ask you a quick question. We'll have a quick open. We're amongst friends, Labour friends here. I know we've had a big turnover of ministers, but it doesn't feel like the Labour Party have come up with any proposal. Is this, are you that, you talked about what you'd like to see.
Yeah,
is that Labour Party a policy?
I very much plug my own furrow on this. Right. That's not just because it's gambling. I tend to do that anyway, because that's the whole reason why I'm on the backbench, and I'm staying on the backbench, is because I'll do what I think is right, not necessarily what I think I should be told to do. Nobody's ever told me not to say what I say, but I'm not going to ask anybody what I should say.
But do you think it's a bit of a problem that I looked up Labour Party gambling proposals and took me back to pre-2019, Tom Watson and all of that stuff.
I don't think we've been as proactive since Tom was around, if I'm honest. I think we. Tom was very active in this, and we worked together quite closely. I've not had that same kind of relationship around the gambling question since then.
And I hope that the manifesto is to be developed, that Labour can put together.
I really don't know. I've got some influence over the menopause in the manifesto, and I did have some influence last time over the manifesto as well. But I'm not having those conversations.
Okay, so
And that is chatting about rules.
Yeah.
That's not for public.
3 minutes left. Who would like to ask Karen a question? Yes.
Hi there, I'm Lucia and I'm a councillor in Haringey. And I wanted to ask you just quickly your take on a couple of things. One is we've talked about online, and one of the things we're really concerned about is young people and children, and I wondered if you can see anything that's come up in discussions. And I think we're really anxious to see something stronger from the party actually. For us as a local authority, the other side of it, I was just talking to Will before about is our ability to have some control over our high streets as well.
So I would urge you to use the National Policy Forum to do that and to feed in that you want stronger, and also maybe write to your MP and lobby your MP around what you feel you need, Labour MP then, or as a GC, that you actually feed that in. Children. But the problem we've got with children is that I firmly believe that a lot of the problems with young people and children stems from loot boxes. Loot boxes are not currently covered under the Gambling Act anyway. The government did do a separate consultation on that, but nothing has really come from that. We've not seen it included in the Gambling Act in any way whatsoever. But it's a fact of life that when you have children who play things like FIFA and they see gambling logos on shirts, that does influence them as they grow up and as they grow older. And I've seen studies from Australia that say that when children grow up and see these logos on shirts, that they grow up with a loyalty to that gambling company. So as they progress and they're old enough to place a bet, they will place a bet with that gambling company because they feel that there's some kind of loyalty to their football team and them. But the truth of it all is the social media, it comes to the internet again. If you are, no matter who you are, you haven't got to look far on your phone to find adverts and offers and inducements to actually click on a button, even on kids' games. If you look on kids' games, it will be advertising. If you look at a newspaper online, it might be an article that's saying online gambling is the worst thing possible, and underneath it will be a gambling advertisement. So until we get that sorted, we're not going to be able to help children. There's something like over 60,000 problem gamblers who are aged between 11 and 16. So we're going to ask ourselves, how did we get into that position? But the Gambling Act won't be looking at that, because as far as the government is concerned and the legislation is concerned, this is about the gambling industry, which is 18 plus. So the answer to that is no. We need to be looking at that as a separate issue.
Interesting. Sorry, I just wanted to to Hogg. And now are you seeing any conversations about that, because we're also SME Labour here, about the impact on high streets? I know we talked about online and it's really clear that dynamic around how we can manage our high streets.
Yes, when the FOBTs were an issue, that was a massive tool for us, because we were using the antisocial behaviour and the destroying of machines and people's interaction in the bookies. We were using that as an argument why they needed to actually reduce the stakes, because it came down to hard facts in the end, and the economic argument. If you don't do A, then B, C, D and E is going to happen. I don't get any complaints now about. The only complaints I've ever had recently over the last 2 years about high streets has been 24-hour adult gaming centres. That's been the only thing that I've had. And my response to them was, I will help you run a campaign, because you shouldn't have 24 hours adult gaming centres in high streets when you've got kids walking to school. Simple as, you shouldn't have them, because you're going to have the same problems as you get with the bookies.
We have them all over. I think it's a real issue. So I'm sure it's an issue all over the country. It's an issue for us in London boroughs, because we have a stretch of, you'll have 6 shops and 3 will be betting shops. We have 24-hour gaming centres well within the vicinity of mini schools. So real source of frustrating for us. Frustration around being able to have impact in our community. Our residents, they write to us. Maybe I should tell residents
to write. But a lot of that is down to the planning as well. You need to speak to the planning inspectorate and give a reason why they shouldn't have it. I think it was Newham got pretty good on the planning when it came to the bookies. Maybe well worth talking to Newham Council about how they managed to do it. But that's the only complaints I've had about high streets has been around antisocial behaviour, was when it was the fixed odds, not anymore.
If you can squeeze one more in.
Yeah, well, I can see Tony, I need to answer Tony's question.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on the point from Haringey Council there and ask, going forward after the white paper and sort of looking to Labour's policy on gambling in the future, is looking at giving more powers to the local municipals or local councils to make decisions for gambling in their own areas. That's something that Labour would potentially look at, because regarding the points about complaints, my question is how those would feed up into the Westminster political system. Anyway, I've made numerous complaints to my local council and they go absolutely nowhere. And I think, again, if we look at some of the reforms that are happening across Europe, where powers have been given to the local municipals, we're seeing that the local councils are making decisions that actually they're the best people to see what's going on. So my own experience is I lived in Brno in Czech Republic for quite a number of years, and I lost an absolute fortune in these adult gaming centres. Same operators, Admiral is being one of them. I went back there recently, powers up with the local council. I went round all the old homes and none of them were there. They're all gone. Because they could see the damage that they were doing. It's so
It's like head shops, isn't it? When we made psychoactive substances illegal, we saw all the shops that were selling them all closing down. So, and I think what you will see with Keir's government, because he will be Prime Minister, that's the last thing I do, he will be Prime Minister. I think what you will see is that there will be more localisation of decision making, because this is something he's already said quite forcibly that he wants to see happening. One more question before I go. No one?
Oh, there we go.
Not so much a question as an observation and something to worry about. We're talking about children, and the latest gambling stats on 16-year-olds from November is that the prevalence rate was 0.9. I agree entirely with what Will is saying, that prevalence rates are smoke and mirrors, but 0.9 is 4.5 times the adult rate. So that's for 11 and 16s who aren't theoretically engaged with gambling. And in parallel with that, the YGAM survey on students, intelligent students, found that 71% were active gamblers, and of that, 17% of the total were problem gamblers. And that's 50 times the adult prevalence rate, and that's
the next generation.
Yeah, that's where the advertising normalisation has embedded it. And, is that a tsunami of more problem gamblers, more suicide? I think it is.
I agree. It's all down to social media. It's all down on your phone.
Thank you.
Is that it? I'm sort of menopause now.
I think that's you go.
Come in for coffee. Bye, guys.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much.
Very good to see you. Good. Will I press pause? Can I press play again? Sorry to do that. But,
I was going to reflect on what Karen said was likely to be in the white paper. She'll know more than I do. Others in this room will be as up to speed as I am. Speaking to the Secretary of State about it a couple of weeks ago, I got the impression, like Karen said, she wouldn't want her name on something that she wasn't over the detail of. And as a barrister by training, she's smart and she picks up the detail quickly. She's interested in the legal ramifications of it. I think I'm very confident that Karen's statutory levy will be in the white paper at this point. I think it was actually shakier under Chris Phil than it is now, and I think that's a mark of how things have changed. I think it's worth mentioning that those in the public health community who have come in and started questioning whether a statutory levy is actually the answer to this situation. People in public health are concerned that it would allow elements of the gambling industry and online bit, for example, the political model, to say that they've done their bit and therefore they're going to need to do more. They were concerned that there would be trade-offs in the white paper. So, yes, we'll give you a statutory levy, but in exchange for something watered down on affordability checks or on online stake limits, that sort of thing. I haven't seen evidence of that happening this time. I did under the Chris Philp administration with dying day of the Boris Johnson administration. It was fundamentally clear to me that there was trading going on between policies that would be in or out by unelected officials in Number 10 and MPs on the reform side of the debate. So, I'm not getting the sense that that's happening this time. And I very much see the statutory levy, as Carolyn says, as sort of levelling the playing field, really, giving that money in a clean way so that there's proper evidence. There will be a proper evidence base around this sector in 5 or 10 years' time, so that policymakers have all that they need to make intelligent, targeted regulation. At the moment, the industry will cry foul and say, well, there's not enough evidence here, there's not enough evidence there. In some cases, they're not wrong. They're part of the reason why there isn't, right? Some people in the industry are part of the reason why there isn't, but actually they're not wrong, which is really frustrating. I would still urge policymakers to take a sort of precautionary principle. We can see the harm, we can see the body count. I can show them my inbox, right? We know people have died because it's absolutely horrific. Really, we should be taking a precautionary principle. And longer term, what I'd like to see is very much that instead of trying to clean up the mess that's caused by bad sets of products and practices after you've let them out onto the market, that there'd be an expectation, the Gambling Commission would have an expectation that the industry would prove that the products are not meeting some sort of addiction threshold, right? The spin speed, at the moment, you're allowed to put a product on the market that spins every 2.5 seconds. No one knows whether that's safe. I can tell you it isn't. 2.5 seconds, that speed of play for the human brain, our brains are not designed to deal with the cognitive hit that's that quick. What is a safe speed? Couldn't tell you. We need the research. But really, we should be asking the Gambling Commission to regulate products before they're released onto the market, rather than say, oh Christ, we've got a body count because we've allowed them online slot machines, we've given 100 spins for free to people in their 18. So I think the level will be in there. I think there'll be something on affordability, but the detail will be dealt with around consultations, and so there'll be really, I think lots of people see the announcement of the white paper as the end of the process, and I very much see it as the starting pistol, if you will, of what will be quite a big tussle, and elements of the industry that don't want the types of reforms that we're asking for will fight absolutely tooth and nail to delay, to obfuscate, to push the consultations in their favour. We wouldn't expect them to do anything else. People on our side of the reform debate obviously do our best with very limited resources to try and get something which is appropriate as we see it. When that will land, whether you need secondary legislation to push some of those things through, whether you need primary legislation for something, this isn't over when you get a white paper. And I think just coming to the final point about the opportunities then for the Labour Party in this, and where I started, which is like the public get it, right? The public are not buying the industry's narrative that this is an amazing thing for jobs in the country and everybody loves gambling so much and don't, tell us what we can do. There's snooty people in London telling working people what they can and can't do with their money. Oh, that's not what this is about, right? At its worst, this is about very wealthy, greedy people, mainly based offshore in Gibraltar, Malta, Isle of Man, Ireland, taking money from people who cannot afford to lose it, and people who are suffering mental health harm. This is like prime territory for the Labour Party. This is it. And the public get it. So if they get out in front of that, I think there are opportunities for them. And I think the obvious ones are, we're pretty sure there's going to be almost nothing around advertising in the white paper. There'll be some deal done with the Premier League that they'll voluntarily take adverts off the front of their shirts and then leave the other 10,000 adverts in the stadium every 90 minutes alone and leave advertising as it is. And part of the reason for that is not just the industry that lobby to keep advertising, there's a sort of associated gambling establishment. ITV make a lot of money from gambling, they don't want any restrictions. To be fair to the government, they're faced with a wave of people saying that there's absolutely no link between advertising and harm. There is. But there's an opportunity there for Labour to say, well, if there's nothing on ads, this is the bit that the public hate the most, right? It's the bit that's most visible. Parents, when they take their kids to football, are sick of seeing adverts to their children. And if the government releases a white paper and doesn't take serious action on advertising, there's an opportunity for the Labour Party to say something about that, and it would be politically expedient to do so. So I think that would be where I would be advising Lucy Powell to frame her statement in response to whatever's released by the government. And the other opportunities, I think, for them, Labour, the party of the NHS, right? This is their safe territory. This is where they push and they win votes on it. And what we've got is everybody in Britain now saying this is a public health issue. You've even got people from the gambling charities saying this is a public health issue. Very few people actually detail what that means. You've got a lot of frustrated people who work in public health going, they're sick of hearing people like me who don't have public health degree talk about, gambling is a public health issue. I think I probably do know what gambling is a public health issue means personally, but there are lots of people who don't say it. Actually, there's a big gap here. Gambling is probably regulated by the wrong department. The harms are mental health harm. We start with mental health harm, it leads into financial harm, leads into relationship harm, leads into all the other things that we know about, right? But at its centre, it's a mental health harm. If you treat this as a public health issue, as a health issue, you've got to allow the department that governs the health of the country to have a much bigger say over the regulations of these products and practices. So whether or not you move it from DCMS to health, or you have some much greater role for health. So I think there's an opportunity there for Labour to reframe on this and say that under their government you'd see much greater action on advertising and you'd see it treated genuinely as a public health issue.
Thank you, very, very interesting. And I think you're right on all these consultations, and if we're only a year away probably from an election, so it feels like there'll be a Labour government, we all hope, that will actually be bringing a lot of this in, from the results of the consultations and all the rest. So I hope you're right about, to me it's very interesting that Carolyn didn't want to be too critical, but clearly a lot of people are unhappy with the fact that the Labour Party hasn't seemed to have come out with their own gambling proposals. I remember talking to Alex Sobel MP, I can't remember, he was shadow gambling ministry maybe for a bit, and I remember him saying, oh yes, we're all debating it, we're talking about it, we're going to come up with something. And of course, we got moved on, we blame the government, but of course Labour are just as bad at reshuffling anyway. Right, technically we've got another hour and a quarter. I'm not sure if we'll last that long, but let's have a bit of an open discussion if people would like to, and of course ask Will some more questions. Obviously knows so much about things, so comments.
Where I would like to see Labour in terms of going forward after the white paper, look, talking about electronic gambling machines, to me they're all the same. It doesn't matter whether they're in pubs, it doesn't matter whether they're in AGMs, it doesn't matter whether they're online. They're essentially a dangerous product in my opinion and from my experience. And there is no way to know who can safely play that product. That's the key point. So you don't know when somebody walks up and starts putting their money in whether they can safely play it. The sort of stakes limits that we've been hearing about, and bearing in mind that over the last decade we've seen wage stagnation, living costs shoot up, salaries haven't gone up, minimum wage hasn't gone up. The people who are funding this industry, they're coming from the poorest and most vulnerable in society. And, the £2 to £5 stake that's talked about online, even the £2 stakes that you find in the high street, the £1 in the pub. If you think about what someone's taking home, the average worker in a weekly wage, I've lost that in a pub in 50 minutes. I was having a candid conversation with John beforehand, and he's very willing to talk about it, but I've had a lapse in one of these AGMs, and £1,400 in an hour, no intervention, no one says anything. So the harm is there, and people find it very hard to talk about it. And I don't think we are. I think there are a lot of people who are funding this industry, are funding it, at the cost to their family, and we're not getting to these people. And I do really believe that the product is dangerous. I personally would be very happy to see it not on the high street, but I also recognise that's unlikely to happen. But then we have to have an honest, open conversation about that. I think the stake limits are too high, and I think bodies like BACTA need to be really looking at what they can do to stop people who already know they have a problem, like myself, who don't want to go ever into those places again, from being able to exclude indefinitely. And I was talking about what they've done in Central Europe, where actually it's based on an ID system, but it could be on a card system. But there has to be no loopholes in it, And actually, they need to look at the pubs as well. We've got alcohol. We've got children in pubs. Those aren't even the right environment. So, to bring it back to the point, the stakes are too high. You can lose phenomenal amounts of money, and these are the people that are losing it week in, week out, month in, month out, on which the industry is making its profits. And I'm sure, the councils like Hungary, they know what's, they see this. I know that people see this in my council as well. But at the moment, the councils don't have the power. So I think it's about giving power to councils. It's really saying these stake limits are too high, and it's about proper self-exclusion. We've been talking about it for years, ladies and gentlemen. We've been talking about it for years. We really need a stronger policy, because otherwise, I feel people like me, the outward suffering just continues.
Thank you, Tony. Can I ask you, on the council bit and the sort of planning side, well, those are the experts, probably John, other planning rules, doesn't sound like they are as good as they could.
Aim to permit. They aim to permit.
Right.
So in order for a license, it's actually, we found it virtually impossible to stop. For example, our recent example is a gaming centre wanting a 24-hour licence. It's virtually impossible for us to do it. We've tried to work very closely with the police. I can't explain to you all the levels of antisocial behaviour and that kind of, and it's that medium harm. I'm not talking about that, but which impacts our whole community. It's visible. Our residents are in uproar and really frustrated by what they're. I have a small stretch of shops in my ward. It literally is 7 shops, 3 old betting shops, and the associated challenges with that, and also the vulnerability. And I think the way you express it, Tony, is precisely what we see and feel. We see our most vulnerable people. We have I think one of the wards in my borough is one of the most highly deprived. I think it's in the top 2, if not the third, number 1 in the country. And we see people lay down, and even laying down, I'm afraid, £20 or £30 a week there, that will have huge effects on your family. And we see it there really live. And it's virtually, others might tell me, but we so far have found it impossible, because of aim to permit, to say, look, in the stretch of 10 shops, okay, we're not saying no betting shops, people have a right to make choices, but do we think it's okay for a 24-hour licence to be granted on a high street where we have lots of young people? We have 3 secondary schools within the area, 3 primary schools. Is that okay for us? We feel uncomfortable with the level of other shops that are already there. It's sending a message to our young people, and it is also enabling some really vulnerable people. You're right, we're in a cost of living crisis, and naturally people are already in that betting shop. They're spending a huge amount of their income on betting. So for us, it's a real issue, and I think all London boroughs, and I'm sure other boroughs across the country, feel the same.
It was interesting, going back to what Carolyn said about A, not being sort of any sort of Labour proposals, B, Labour will have to respond to the white paper when it comes, and C, we've got a manifesto and hope for the future Labour government. So it feels like now's the time it's right to be going to talk. It's Alex Davis-Jones, who's a shadow gambling minister, and there's Lucy Powell, as you said. And maybe, I guess there should be an opportunity to be getting Labour to be starting to think about these things, especially. I don't know if anyone's got any idea whether the white paper will cover this. Do you think it will cover on the planning side, on the terrestrials? No. John?
I feel like I should comment. So I'm John White, actually executive of BAGSA, which is the Amusement Machine Trade Association, but here in a personal capacity as a Labour Party member, and keen to get the gambling reform right, and for Labour to have a proper policy and proper response to the white paper when it comes. But clearly informed by what is now probably approaching 20 years in BAGSA, in 2 stints. And I very often don't recognise the characterisations of the industry that you portray, Will, and I don't actually think that we can very easily get sucked in, both sides of the debate, to a kind of Animal Farm type, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, wasn't it? And just never find any ground in the middle. The politics, the public policy is all about compromise. It's about finding middle ground. That's what stands the test of time. That's what achieves the best result. And then we must never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And there is lots of middle ground here. I've got huge issues with the online sector. I mean, it's grown and it's grown and grown. Social media, it's just ripped away and caused all sorts of problems in all sorts of areas. And that's clearly washed back on the land-based sector, and my sector in particular, which is why we came in for a lot of criticism from our colleagues in the online sector to campaign against FOBT. And we were told that this was because it was commercial. Well, there was an element of commercialism in there because a lot of customers who were playing in adult gaming centres and seemingly doing so relatively safely and comfortably were moving across to FOBTs. The product was very exciting. You could win big sums of money very, very quickly, and of course, conversely, lose huge amounts of money very, very quickly as well. And that's why we saw just incredible rates of problem gambling attributed to FOBTs. And that was just not right. And our position in that respect was, you've got to go. It's not right. It's not right. And that, I think, is where the debate is. What is the right level of gambling, the right products, have them on the high streets? How do we plan for our high streets? Which, that's a massive, great issue. I mean, nobody wants to see clustering of kebab shops or McDonald's or betting offices or anything. We want diverse high streets delivering diverse products and services to our communities, which everyone's comfortable with. And there is. I keep coming back to there is middle ground as long as we have a balanced and mature debate around it. Research. God, there is a dearth of good research out there. And there's some good research out there, but there's a real dearth of it. I think Gambleware is actually quite good. I think it's a million miles away from where it was. Well, I used to sit on Gambleware years and come along, and it was exactly as you said. The industry said, where should we put our money? I mean, it's completely wrong. I mean, I think it's delivering a level of independence now. The biggest problem, and why I think there should be a statutory levy, and there will be a statutory levy, I think is consistency of funding. You cannot plan for the sorts of research that we need to do, particularly that longitudinal research, without some certainty of funding. Secondly, I think we can all agree this is a public health issue. I mean, I really, really don't understand why that's difficult for some people in the gambling industry to accept. And my analogy is always around alcohol rather than tobacco. I mean, that would be the analogy I would use, and that that's a public health issue. Alcoholism, we deal with that. We should be doing exactly the same with gambling, in my particular view. And I also, and this might be difficult for us to talk about, but I think you have to have the debate that's maybe not explicitly taken up, but it's taken place around alcohol, about gambling. My view is, society has to determine actually what level of harm it is prepared to accept on the basis that there will always be harm if you allow this particular activity to take place. We as a society seem fairly comfortable, and it's a horrible thing to say, with people suffering tremendous harm from alcohol consumption, excess alcohol consumption. And we kind of trade that for our freedoms to be able to go down the pub or to buy a bottle of gin and tonic in a supermarket. Can we have that debate about gambling? I don't know. It's very, very difficult. But if we could, then we could probably better target the funds that we do get to actually deal with both prevention, education, and treatment. Very, very difficult conversation to have. And the final thing I say in terms of developing the policy, we must not forget that actually these are businesses. My members, are largely small and medium enterprises. Seaside arcades, small businesses that hire jukeboxes and pool tables and fruit machines to pubs. And they do employ people, and they do bring economic benefits to local economies. And we mustn't forget that in the debate. We must also not forget the debate. There's a lot of people that do gamble and actually quite enjoy doing it. And again, that is a legitimate part of the debate that we must bear in mind when we're trying to reach that kind of middle ground that I think that we can arrive at. So where does that leave Labour with its policy? I think actually Carolyn was right. I think you're right. We've not actually, as a Labour Party, properly yet formulated our position on gambling. Now, you can understand in my professional capacity, I do a lot of lobbying, go to see a lot of people. On the Labour side, it isn't quite coherent yet, and it needs to be. And I suspect what's going to happen is that it will kind of be forged on the hoof once the white paper's been published. And that's where we're kind of getting at. And I think there's some fundamentals we've got to agree as a party. If you were to press me on what they are, that would be yes. I think everybody agrees. Nobody here is saying that we're anti-gambling, but it's about having a responsible, safe gambling industry out there. And I have to hold my hands up to Tony, because we were having that conversation earlier. I mean, you know, we are not getting it right in our sector. If your experience is well, it is what it is. I mean, that should not be happening. So the industry's really got to put its socks up, and if it doesn't, then it quite rightly should be legislated against.
John, as if we are SME for Labour and you represent lots of SMEs, what would you like to see out of the white paper yourself? What would help SMEs in your sector?
So getting very parochial. I mean, I think this review has been largely about online. You know, 95% of the debate has already been out online, as I said at the very beginning. That's where we need to see some regulation. Some serious changes need to take place there. We would like to see some of the kind of 1968 Act hangovers disappear. And these are very much business things. So you can't link machines together in a venue. And we would like to be able to do that, so that you could have another way of winning the jackpot. You know, it's just another way of winning the jackpot on that. We'd like the opportunity to say to customers, if you wish to pay with your debit card, you can pay with your debit card. I mean, this is 2023. You know, we're seeing cash disappear, and actually, we think that could be quite a good way of spotting and managing people that might be developing a gambling problem. And interestingly, you may have seen the debates that's emerging in New South Wales, where the government is under a lot of pressure to make playing on a machine mandatory by the use of a card, an account-based play. So you know, you could have that. You know, you could use your phone or a debit card to do that. So that's something we'd like to see, and we'd also like to have. And I hope everyone could agree with this. We'd also like to see regular reviews, so that rather than this kind of episodic, you know, it's almost intergenerational debate about what gambling policy looks like, we should be doing this on a regular basis. There's emerging evidence all the time. You know, say about the products, you know, I don't know what a good spin speed is. You know, 2.5 seconds is a spin speed for most games on land. It's a 5-second game usually, you know, we've got the interactions and all the rest of it. You go too long, players get very, very bored with it very, very quickly. But clearly you don't really know, because it feeds everything that we know from research about people who are predisposed towards having some kind of gambling problem, getting themselves really, really intensely worked up into that zone that has been called. So you know, there's so much research that needs to be done to actually identify that. And rather than having an argument every 15 or 20 years about it, why aren't we doing this every 2 or 3 years?
Sure about that.
If you're doing it every 2 or 3 years,
sure.
It's not going to be such a big mouthful, is it? We're going to be eating the elephant in small bites.
Yeah, so I'm at Abraham Dugan. So when he sort of came to me in January and said, look, I do a lot with Labour campaign for gambling reform, would you like to take it on as one of the accounts? I was like, absolutely, that sounds fantastic. So my background isn't in sort of addiction and gambling, it's addiction and alcohol. So both of my parents are alcoholics, my grandfather was an alcoholic, it's in the family. And I think what you said, especially John, about not comparing necessarily the gambling industry to the tobacco industry, but comparing it to the alcohol industry is really interesting, and something that I think we need to talk about more. I think they go hand in hand. When we talk about addiction, we need to be talking about gambling addiction and how prevalent that is on the high street day to day, as well as alcoholism. We know that over 40% of adults in this country are currently drinking in excess. I'm not saying they're all alcoholics, but I'm saying it's excessive. Gambling is the same thing. And it's easy to fall into the trap of sort of alcoholism and addiction to that, as well as gambling. So I suppose my wide question to you and to Will is sort of with gambling reform and your motives surrounding it, and also your work on it, could you bring in sort of changes as well and bring in the conversation towards alcoholism? Because like I say, and like you say, they go hand in hand. I've witnessed it with my mum especially. So she became an alcoholic when I was 5, and quickly she progressed and spiralled into gambling, into prostitution, into drugs, into all of these things that sort of like almost go hand in hand together. Once you start one, it's easy to fall into the trap of another one. And so yeah, I was just wondering, sort of, is there an appetite to widen the debate? Because like I say, as sort of like a victim of addiction, it is a disease. It isn't sort of, and it has to be seen as that. Can we widen that debate? Can we widen the conversation and the dialogue around it?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, sorry. Like, it's a broad, it's an open question.
No, really, really interesting, and thanks for sharing your experience of it. And there is a correlation between suffering gambling harm and alcoholism. There's often debates what comes first, and it can be either, clearly. But I always caveat, when talking about this subject, I always caveat that there is, it can be used to stigmatise people suffering a gambling addiction, to link it too closely to alcoholism, because it fits the narrative that there's just, again, this small group of people who are vulnerable and they probably have a pre-existing comorbidity, which might be, few people ever try and define what somebody's vulnerable is, right? Some people say it's genetics, which is dangerous territory, right? Because what's the policy implication of that? If we start researching people's DNA and say, well, these people are vulnerable to gambling products that spin through, it's like this isn't where we're at, right? The human brain is standardized enough that we know that gambling products in themselves are addictive to any human brain. Anyone is susceptible to addiction. If you've got an alcohol issue, you may find yourself up against some of these products in a pub, more to use sort of Tony's analogy, and so where's that interrelationship and what's the causal bit to it? That's not to dismiss it at all, it needs to be considered. I think the references to tobacco that I made and the references to alcohol, there are some parallels with gambling in terms of public health approach and response. My references to tobacco was always about how parts of the industry have responded, and the tactics of parts of the gambling industry very closely reflect the tactics of the tobacco industry over the last 60 years. There's just no escaping, right? In terms of funding politicians, in terms of funding research, which distracts and pushes the individual responsibility narrative, same with the fossil fuel industry, of course, and in terms of the stigmatisation around it, in terms of questioning the health impacts, all of this is classic tobacco stuff. You see a bit of it in alcohol. Alcohol as an industry is interesting. It's more complex and diverse, actually. And you've got, I suppose, in that regard, I think it does have more parallels towards gambling. So nobody thinks it's okay to serve a pint of scotch. You just wouldn't do it. You go to the pub and ask the bar person, can I have a pint of scotch? It's going to say no, right? But can I go and have 1,000 spins on an online slot over a 24-hour period without sleep? And the online operator is going to offer you more for free afterwards. I've seen it, like literally seen it. Yeah. So that there are some really interesting parallels, but I think as well, because of online, we are learning. We're literally like the research is so scant in terms of how social media affects our brain, in terms of how a spin speed of 2.5 seconds and the flashing lights and losses disguised as wins and all these tricks, psychological tricks to keep you engaged, what they're doing to the brain. That's where the parallels to alcohol stop. The products are so different that we couldn't just pick up what we do with alcohol and drop it. I accept the point about harm. Clearly that's the position we're in, and if you say you're not anti-gambling, then you have to accept a level of risk of harm and some harm, and that's the position that I'm in for sure. Having a debate openly about what's an acceptable level of harm is clearly difficult, and people will probably dance around that. But,